If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address.
No, I think that Waltz is a grossly incompetent man. There's something wrong with him, okay? There's something wrong with him. And when you look at what he's done with Somalia, which is barely a country, you know, they have no anything. They just run around killing each other. There's no structure. And when I see somebody like Ilhan Omar, who I don't know at all, but I always watch her for years. I've watched her complain about our Constitution, how she's being treated badly. Our Constitution, the United States of America, is a bad place. Hates everybody, hates Jewish people, hates everybody. And I think she's an incompetent person. She's a real terrible person. But when I watch what is happening in Minnesota, the land of 1,000 lakes, or however many lakes they have, they got a lot of lakes, but this beautiful place, and I see these people ripping it off, and now I'm understanding, and you're going to look at that, Scott, I hear they ripped off Somalians, ripped off that state for billions of dollars, billions, every year, billions of dollars, and they contribute nothing. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, I'll be honest with you, okay? Somebody would say, oh, that's not politically correct. I don't care. I don't want them in our country. Their country's no good for a reason. Their country stinks, and we don't want them in our country. I can say that about other countries, too. I can say it about other countries, too. We don't want them to hell. We have to rebuild our country. You know, our country's at a tipping point. We could go bad. We're at a tipping point. I don't know if people mind me saying that, but I'm saying it. We could go one way or the other, and we're going to go the wrong way if we keep taking in garbage into our country. Ilhan Omar is garbage. She's garbage. Her friends are garbage. These aren't people that work. These aren't people that say, let's go, come on, let's make this place great. These are people that do nothing but complain. They complain. And from where they came from, they got nothing. You know, they came from paradise, and they said, this isn't paradise. But when they come from hell, and they complain, and do nothing but bitch, we don't want them in our country. Let them go back to where they came from and fix it.
When Donald Trump says that Somalians are garbage, I have to wonder, where did he get that kind of talk from? And why does it sound so familiar? Perhaps because it's what the immigrants from Somalia have said about foundational Black Americans for decades. Not just recently, but for several decades now. And yes, we, the FBA community, recognize that Trump hates black people, obviously. My question is, why didn't the Somalians figure that out when they were out there stomping for him last year?
On the campaign trail in Minnesota last summer, President Donald Trump caught the attention of this man. Salman Fiki had a front row seat for the St. Cloud rally. He says he got the call from the president's team to help drum up support for the Republican ahead of Election Day. Fiki, a Somali immigrant, says he is proud to support conservative policies, but says his support for the president is now gone.
You see, as the black media, there were a lot of things we said about Trump, but the one thing we didn't say was go out and vote for him. My question is, can the Somalians and others legitimately complain about this when they've spent nearly a century saying that we're not black every chance they get? Can they claim that this is racism when they've done everything that they can to deny being black at all? And I didn't hear Trump say anything about I'm deporting all the black people. He said Somalians. So if they agree that they're not black, and Trump himself says this is about Somalians, where's the racial issue? See how that works? People have the nerve to claim that we're being divisive when we wasted decades trying to unite with everyone, including Somalians, and they told us they wanted nothing to do with us. We stuck up for them even after all this disrespect and abuse, to the point that they felt they didn't even have to stick up for themselves. But they still told us they wanted nothing to do with us and that they weren't black. That's who's being divisive. Before I go any farther, I want to make sure I mention that we got plenty of on-code immigrants, by the way, and although their voice may be small, it still should be acknowledged. We don't want to say that every single one of these immigrants is beyond the BS, But we do ourselves no favors by denying the fact that a majority has been. That's just a fact. And that's a huge part of the reason why we've had so many of these off-code immigrants who have been able to come here, and they found that they had support from people who should have known better. When both the major parties enacted policies to target black Americans, these same immigrants, many of them Somalian, joined in with white power and tried to capitalize on those attacks by emphasizing they're not black, they're immigrants, they're Muslims, etc. This is the people of color game that these immigrants have been playing since day one. When they claim that I don't identify as black because XYZ, what they really mean is I recognize that to be black is to be in opposition to white supremacy, and I don't want to do that. I'm trying to finesse a comfortable place for myself under white supremacy at any cost to you, so I'll go right along with it and attack black people to prove to the dominant society that I won't cause any trouble. It's cowardly, subservient, and dishonorable, and everyone who takes this posture knows it. A very popular talking point that tethers like to use is to claim that black Americans commit so much crime because they, as immigrants, well, they come from a superior culture. They work hard. Black Americans are lazy and prone to crime. All of those white supremacist talking points, they have no shame about regurgitating them. And well, you see, it's due to the African immigrant superior culture and hard work ethic. Everyone knows how hardworking they are, and they don't do crime. They've said that for decades now. Decades. Well, don't look now, but the GOP is saying that Somalians are responsible for all the crime in Minneapolis.
Yeah, let me actually play something from Minnesota Republican Congressman Tom Emmer. This is after the president's remarks.
Do you realize that, it's not that all Somalis are committing crimes, but 80% of the crimes being committed in the Twin Cities in Minnesota are being committed by Somalis?
His office referenced reporting on pandemic relief fraud. But what's your response to the congressman there saying that 80% of the crimes being committed in the Twin Cities in Minnesota are from Somali Americans?
So the exact same people who seem to be playing along with the narrative that, oh yeah, these immigrants, they're not out here committing crime with these black Americans. On a dime, they have flipped it. Now they're saying exactly the opposite. So the claim that black immigrants have made, that foundational black Americans have the reputation for committing crimes while immigrants don't, well, the dominant society is now saying, nah, it's you immigrants, it's you guys. The Orange Man even has the White House website blasting this out to the public, talking about how this is East Africans and Somalians. He's putting this on the White House's own official website. For so long, these black immigrants claimed to have been so prosperous, and they said that it was so easy because they have superior work ethic. Well, now it's been revealed that billions of dollars are getting ripped off, and nobody was saying a word. We're finally beginning to see where a lot of this alleged success was coming from. And that's the reason that Donald Trump decided he was going to shoot his mouth off this week. One of the things that I've been waiting to see is if he would be following up with any sort of ICE raids in Minneapolis. For a little while, it looked like he wouldn't, but apparently he woke up from his semi-induced coma and decided to send ICE to Minneapolis, and they're snatching Somalians off the street.
ICE arrested at least 12 people during this week's operation around the cities, and nearly half of those detained are originally from Somalia.
Rhoda Christensen says she learned from a neighbor on Monday that her husband, Abdul Qadir Sharif Abdi, had been detained.
I'm driving on the road, and she goes, "Hey, Rhoda, ICE is in your apartment." And I was silent for a minute.
After going to Fort Snelling first for processing, Christensen says her husband is now in a detention facility in Nebraska. Abdi's story has been documented extensively by local media over the years. A Somali refugee who fled civil war in the 90s, he committed several felonies while part of a Minneapolis gang, but was said to have turned his life around after getting sober and becoming a mentor in the recovery community. In 2018, his lawyers successfully lobbied against his deportation, but this week ICE described him as a, quote, known current member of Vice Lord Nation with convictions of fraud, receiving stolen property, receiving a stolen vehicle, vehicle theft, and multiple probation violations. Homeland Security says that Abdi is one of 12 people arrested during ICE's Operation Metro Surge, describing all as being here illegally with criminal histories ranging from child sex abuse to domestic assault.
So you have a known gang member from Somalia, and he decided to marry a white woman because he's so proud of his Somali heritage. Isn't this something we hear from the Somalians? They'll be the very first ones to tell you, we have a superior culture, we have a superior bloodline, we got a superior lineage, never been colonized, we're so proud of who we are. We're just so proud of our culture, so proud of our culture. Yes, so proud that they fled their home country, and so proud that they're snuggling up with the first blonde thing that they can find. In this guy's case, I think it's safe to say that he married a white person because he thought that it would give him immunity from the law by osmosis. If anybody comes calling, you can go ahead and have your blonde wife out there and she'll vouch for you, right? Well, how'd that work out? This guy fled from one of the wars that his country was conducting, and then when he got to the U.S., he immediately began committing crimes. Now, the thing to remember is that when these immigrants come here from Africa or the Caribbean and commit crime, that keeps getting put under the black category instead of Somalian or Nigerian or Jamaican. When it comes time for them to take credit for something, then all of a sudden, there's no black at all. I'm not black, I'm Somalian, I'm Nigerian, etc. Meanwhile, they also set up these little community organizations in these enclaves where they settle at. And we know all too well that these so-called community organizations are nothing more than immigrant advocacy organizations. That's all they do. And if you're a foundational black American who makes the mistake of actually going to one of these groups and thinking that you're part of the community, that they're going to be helping the community, they'll tell you quick, nah, this is supposed to be for our folks. We're not black. We're doing this for Somalians. We're doing this for Ethiopians, Nigerians. We're doing this for Haitians. They'll be real quick to go ahead and slam the door in your face and practice the exact same kind of discrimination against FBAs that the dominant society does. They weren't trying to help the black community because they made it clear they're not part of the black community. Hell, they said they weren't black. They were doing the most to use the white media to establish a new identity for themselves, one that would be hostile towards us, one that had nothing to do with us other than be antagonistic. People who have been in the country for 40 years, people who are second and even third generation, but who will tell you in a heartbeat, I'm Somalian, I'm Nigerian, I'm Kenyan, etc. That was the hustle they were running. The white media gladly gave them a platform and they did nothing but advocate for themselves. In reality, they were advocating for government money to be given to them for being immigrants. That's what these community organizations are funded by. And in turn, that money often gets sent to business owners from their groups, etc. Or, as we've seen in Minneapolis, just straight up scams. These community organizations were funded by white governmental money, the same way it's now being revealed that the success they talked about came from white government programs. They knew that identifying themselves as immigrants would make it possible for white power to just hand them things. And the same way they refused to unite in their home countries, the same way they constantly betray each other at home, they came here and did the exact same thing. Their plan has been to bootstrap their success off of not just helping to oppress us, but by blaming us for what criminals from their own group kept doing. And the white media played right along with this false narrative because it was useful. For a while. But these white supremacists are showing that they've always known what was really happening. That's how they turn on a dime on them so quickly. And they're applying the specificity that there should have always been. The tethers always say black Americans commit crimes. We don't. You black Americans have a culture of crime. Well, now we're looking at these cases one by one, and what a surprise, we're noticing a disproportionate number of these gang members and these thieves and killers are in fact from immigrant groups and not FBA. And for the longest time, for decades, you've had mushy-headed morons claiming to speak for our group who have been helping these antagonistic immigrant groups to do this. But not anymore. So between the Orange Man's diatribes and all of those ICE visits to Minneapolis, this winter is getting extra cold for the Somalian community. And you know what? That's not our problem. Right about now, I'm sure the Somalians are wondering where the hell is their support from the home country coming from? You know, the one that they fled from. They're wondering why the Somalian embassy isn't coming to their aid. They're wondering why it is that nobody from their home country's government is speaking up for them. After all, they're so proud of their culture. They're so proud of the country that they fled from. So the question now becomes, where the hell is the Somalian prime minister at while all this is going on? Surely he's aware that the president of the United States is calling his people scammers, lazy bums, calling them garbage, saying that they contribute nothing, that their country is hell. He wants all of them gone and doesn't care what anyone thinks. And what is the Somalian prime minister saying while all this is going on? He's saying that it's best not to respond. That's his answer to all this. It is best not to respond. Geez, sounds just like the South African president when he came to the U.S. earlier this year and met with Trump, doesn't it? Every single time one of these African leaders comes to the United States, they do not say a word on behalf of their people. That's mainly because they're at the U.S. in order to advocate for more so-called aid money for themselves, which simply goes into their bank accounts. Everybody knows the grift. And as for the Somalian prime minister, apparently he has no idea that Donald Trump has decided to pause all immigration applications from his country. Apparently he didn't know about that either. Donald Trump is doing everything that he can to humiliate the Somalian people and the Somalian government, and their prime minister is saying it's best not to respond. So he's just taking this abuse and ain't saying and ain't doing nothing about it. And speaking of immigrant politicians who aren't doing anything, the Congressional Black Caucus has weighed in on this issue, sorta. Now, as we all know, the majority of CBC members are immigrants. That's what the majority of the Congressional Black Caucus are. They're immigrants. So we should be calling them the Immigrant Black Caucus because that's what they actually do. That's who they actually advocate for. And some of these people are Somalians. Others are also immigrants from the Horn of Africa, like Joe Neguse of Colorado. Eritrea is where his people are from, which is right next door to Somalia, but he's been quiet on all of this. In fact, if you go to the CBC's website, they're not saying a word about any of this there. They're still talking about opposing Medicare cuts. I guess nobody told them that the federal budget's already been passed. And when you go on Twitter, the Immigrant Black Caucus was so outraged about what Trump said about the Somalians that they reposted one congresswoman's tweet and then posted a non-statement that generally disapproved of Trump's remarks. And that was it. That's all they did. That's all they said. They're not on the warpath because they never have been. They're not standing up for their constituency of immigrants because they're puppets for white power on the left. They only do what their white paymasters tell them to do, and their white paymasters aren't telling them to do anything on this one. Same way that when we were staging uprisings, these cowards were hiding way in the back. Now they're hiding underground. This is why these immigrants can't lead us. Having never stood up to white supremacy in their home countries, they're not about to do it now. They're waiting for us to do the heavy lifting, as always, and some of them are starting to finally realize that's not going to happen. So Somalia's president is reacting to Trump's open hostility towards him and his people by saying he's going to pretend he didn't hear it. Yeah, he didn't hear the most powerful man on earth say that your country is a toilet. You didn't hear the most powerful man on earth say that you and your people are garbage. Apparently he didn't hear it, and he doesn't think he has to say anything about it. And the Immigrant Black Caucus, who has done the most to represent immigrants, responded with a strongly worded Twitter tweet. Yeah, when they talk about their superior culture, how they've never been colonized and how they always stand up to the oppressors, this must be what they're talking about. This is why when these black immigrants try to talk like they're so united, we laugh. When they try to talk tough as if their home country supports them, we roll our eyes. 'Cause they're not fooling anyone. You can't claim you stood up to colonizers when you and everyone you know fled home to be over here. They fled to be here because this is the only place where there were some black folks who were actually fighting for black people's rights and empowerment. That's why they came here. Because ours is the longest and most sustained freedom struggle in the history of the world. We don't run. Not even once. And that makes them feel insecure about themselves. That's the reason why they feel compelled to throw insults at us for no reason. They feel insecure about the fact that they fled instead of fought. When they look in the mirror, they see themselves as cowards, and they try to cover this up with bold fantasies and torrents of insults towards us because they think that when we look at them, we see cowards too. And we're also not surprised that their home country's misleaders ignore their plight, because these same kleptocrats didn't give a rip about them when they were there. These immigrants sound crazy trying to talk as if they have a culture of unity. They don't. Everybody can see it. That's the reason why the orange man doesn't fear any sort of reprisal. Why should he? Their own leaders don't dare speak up on their behalf, and why would they? They have a broken loyalty system. Your world, aka Mr. Harvey Superboy, said it best: America was founded by thieves, slaves, and opportunists. The immigrants are the opportunists. And white power taught them that the fastest way to ingratiate themselves with the dominant society was to prove their loyalty to the racial hierarchy, and that meant to dump on us. America was founded on anti-black racism, not any sort of anti-immigrant anything. And that's the reason why you got all these immigrants, including the black ones, who come over here and the very first words out of their mouths, before they even learn the English language, the first thing they learn to say is, "Me no black, me no black." And they went out of their way to show total disrespect, happily, giddily. I've documented for you on this very YouTube channel that this started long before the 1960s. You had people who were here long before the immigration restrictions were lifted in 65, and these black immigrants who came here in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they were trashing us 24/7 back then. And yes, the numbers of individuals who were doing it before the immigration ban was lifted were far, far smaller, but the hostility was no less virulent. Now let me go ahead and reiterate once again. I recognize that there are on-code people from every portion of Africa and the Caribbean. I'm not saying that there are none. What I'm trying to say is they are in the minority. They are a small, small number. It is the behavior and the actions of the majority from their group that led to this. The entire reason that the orange man feels emboldened to do this is precisely because the dominant society, that is white society, has seen all of this off-code behavior going on. When you have people who are clearly black who decide side that they're going to say that they're not, when they go over the top to show that they're going to be off code, all you've done is to paint yourself as easy prey for white supremacy. And that's precisely what happens. White supremacy doesn't respect weakness. White supremacists respect strength. And doing a bunch of chest thumping about how superior your culture or your home country is, white supremacy is not fooled. They don't see that as strength. They recognize that for the empty boasting that it is. Now, you'll have people who lie and say, well, in Africa or the Caribbean, we don't say black because in our home country, everyone is black, so that's why we don't say black. That's a lie, and they know it. When they get here, they have their little community meetings at their community centers paid for with our taxpayer dollars. And what happens is they never invite us for any reason. Whenever they have their meetings with politicians, they don't say, well, we want to make sure the black community's concerns are heard and addressed. Instead, they say, no, this is about the Somalian community. We're not part of the black community. We're not even black. That's what they do. And this wasn't some misguided but otherwise benign mistake. They were loud about their anti-black hostility, loud and proud, said it with their chest. They were shouting it from the rooftops. That's the reason why these tethers and foreign flag fools you see online on TikTok, Twitter, and elsewhere trying to make it sound as if, oh, none of that's been going on. That's the reason why their lies are falling flat. They're sitting here thinking that they can do some sort of racial Jedi mind trick. Oh, we were not doing that. We were never discriminating against you. We were never disrespecting you. And I guess they figured we would say, yeah, they weren't discriminating against us. They've never disrespected us. No. Their track record is a mile long, very well documented. And then they run around saying they're better than us and do it for decade after decade. See, it would be one thing if this was just the ones who showed up after 1965, or the ones who showed up after the Battle of Mogadishu. As I've shown you here on this channel, they've been doing this decades before the immigration ban was lifted in the 60s. Every successive group of immigrants who have come to the U.S. have brought an anti-black culture with them. And that's particularly perverted because we were the ones who made it possible for them to be here in the first place. We're the only reason that they were able to get in. They segregated themselves. They created barriers between themselves and us. They wanted to be an island unto themselves. Well, this is what happens when your island comes under attack. They prided themselves on being separate from us. They attack us constantly. They attack us in their governments. They attack us through their commentators. They even attack us in their mosques.
ሁለቱም ተገርፈዋል፣ ተጨቁነዋል፣ ታስረዋል፣ እንዳይሰሩ ሀብት እንዳያደረጁ ሆነዋል። ልዩነቱ ጁ ከሲቪል ራይት በኋላ ትንሽ መብት መታየት ሲጀምር ዘፈኑ፣ ግጥሙ፣ ፊልሙ፣ ድራማ ወደፊት ሆነ። እንዴት ዓለምን ኮንከር ማድረግ እንደሚችል ኢኮኖሚክ ፓወር መፍጠር እንደሚችል ያስባል። ጥቁር ደግሞ እዚህ ላይ ቆሞ ትናንትና ኮገረፉ፣ ገደሉ፣ እንዲያደረጉ ይላል። አሁን ያለው ትውልድ ትናንትና ውስጥ እንዲኖር አደረገው። እነዚህ ደግሞ አሁን ነገ ውስጥ እንዲያስብ አደረጉት። 50 ዓመት አልሞላም ጁ ሀብታም ሆነ፣ ጁ ፓወርፉል ሆነ፣ ጥቁር ነፃ ደሃ ሆነ። ነፃነቱን አግኝቷል፣ መዝፈን ይችላል፣ ግን ደህንነቱን መቀየር አልቻለም።
But some of them are singing a brand new tune now, aren't they? At least they're trying to pretend to. The kind of crap that the Ethiopian president was talking is the exact same kind of lies that his countrymen were talking a century ago when they first started coming here. These people are also the same ones who try to claim that they were never colonized and they were never slaves either, and yet they fled their country and take abuse from their very colonizers who they claim never conquered them. This is why they cannot unite amongst themselves. They practiced duplicity and backstabbing and treachery at home, and then they brought that exact same behavior here. So now they need to unite, they need their leaders to speak up for them, and they're finding themselves abandoned and in disarray. They're looking around and wondering, hey, where are those FBAs who are always our doormats and always stuck up for us? Aren't they supposed to be sticking up for us? It's time for them to do their jobs and be our crash dummies and be our shields and take the abuse for us. Where are those Jarirs at? Where are those Akatas at? And you got some of those foreign flags having the nerve to say, oh, I thought that we were friends. No, you don't have any friends because you didn't treat people like friends. You made it very clear you didn't need friends. All you needed was your small enclave because you thought white power was going to feed you. And that being the case, now you're looking around and going, ooh, it looks like we were wrong. Yes, you were. Keep in mind, something that these guys are also very concerned about. With the orange man having come out and done something like this so boldly, don't you know that there's tons of Somalians who are also in Europe? They're also very concerned in those Scandinavian countries that the kind of rhetoric that Trump has pushed, he has crossed the line that's going to make it possible for all of those hard white supremacist right-wingers over there to start saying the exact same thing. America sets the tone for the world. Those far right-wing white supremacist groups have basically become more or less the political right of center now. They've been given all that extremist rhetoric about how we're going to round up all these people and get them out of here. We need to get them out of here. Trump is saying the exact same things that those guys have been saying, and now they're going to feel less bashful about it. Because if the president of the United States does it, well, who's more powerful than him? And if he's not afraid to say it in a quote-unquote multi-ethnic democracy, then why should these guys in their largely homogeneous home countries feel bashful about saying it? That's something that these immigrants are also concerned about. They have a hell of a lot of political vulnerability and exposure in those European countries, where they've been coming in, largely without any sort of documentation, and where every single white supremacist Nimrod over there loves to post videos saying that these people, these immigrants, they're committing all kinds of crimes, and they always sit there and say, well, especially against white women, they are violating our pure white womanhood, etc., etc. They're pushing all the buttons, they're replaying all the greatest hits. This is something these immigrants are concerned about, that Trump is going to embolden these elements, and that after this, they're going to feel like, hell, if Trump did this, if he went this far, then we can go all the way. Now, to be sure, foundational black Americans are not about to cheerlead for the GOP or its candidates to get into office because they refuse to promise us anything. But as for these immigrants getting their wake-up call, as some people have said, I wouldn't bank on that. All I can say is we're going to support them the exact same way they've always supported us. This is why you had all these Somalians in Minnesota who were campaigning for Trump. They hadn't learned anything from Trump's Muslim ban during his first term. Some of these Somalians for Trump are saying that they're embarrassed today, but what they should have been embarrassed by is their disrespectful behavior towards us for the last 100 years. That's what they should be embarrassed by. But they thought that they were on the team. Team white supremacy. Their goal was that they were going to be economically, politically, and eventually socially replacing us. White power would give them money, make them prominent, but always make sure not to mention that they were immigrants. That was the game for a while. And then over time, we would look up and find that the black politicians were now mostly black immigrants who had absolutely no loyalty or even respect for us, who were openly hostile towards us, and that for the few black people who were in these university positions, they were mostly or disproportionately black immigrants. And when you look at the white media, you see black immigrants disproportionately on your TV screens or writing for your newspaper columns. And you'd see them behind the scenes too. White power was making them editors, making them producers, making them even so-called executive vice presidents in these white media corporations. That's what's been going on for the last 50 years, and it's been accelerating for about the last 15 to 20. White power was cherry-picking pliable immigrant tools to replace us. It was meant to be a slow-motion erasure, and these immigrants were fine with it. They had helped white power to supplant and undermine their own people back in their home countries, so they thought nothing of betraying us here. We fought to establish the very rights that they just walked in and automatically enjoyed from day one without doing anything for it. And then we look up and they were spitting in our faces and thinking that they were clever. And I really get a kick out of how the Somalians and other black immigrants are now trying to say, we work so hard, we are hardworking people, we have businesses, America was built by immigrants. They actually think that these white supremacists ever gave a rip about that ever mattered to them. Just because these white supremacists pat you on the head while you go ahead and spout that gibberish, that didn't mean that they liked you. What it meant was they were going to get to savor the mother of all pranks. Like I've always told you, white supremacy loves a cruel prank, especially one that takes a long time to pay off. This is why we're delineating ourselves. We're not letting them swing on the coattails of our history or our struggle. They're immigrants. That's what they are, because they declared that. They don't get to reference the civil rights movement. That was our fight. They wanted to distance themselves from us, and we're going to make sure that they are also distanced from our history, too. They don't get to claim that, oh my God, this reminds me of what happened in the civil rights movement. Civil rights movement, you ain't got nothing to do with that. Every time some black immigrant tried to exalt themselves over us, what would they say? We're more successful than you. That was a popular rhetoric, wasn't it? Well, what's Trump saying? He's saying that they're the least successful. That's what he said repeatedly. These people, no success at all. They have a hole at home, they create a hole here. That's what he's saying. I told you that the idea, that talking point that immigrants are more successful, that's a media myth, mostly from the white right. I showed you the information on that. Clowns like Thomas Sowell, they were the ones who manufactured that lie. And you notice how now that Trump is taking shots at the Somalian community, he's taking shots at the immigrants. Where the hell's Thomas Sowell at? Where's he at and the other white right mouthpieces to say that immigrants are more successful than these black Americans? They're always more successful because they work harder. We should be having more immigrants here because they're more likely to start businesses, etc. Every time the white right takes shots at the immigrants, Thomas Sowell and others fall silent. You can't find them to spout that gibberish anymore. But then again, as Neely Fuller said, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. Though it should also be added, just because white supremacy takes both sides of the conversation doesn't mean that they forget what side they're on. Oh, these immigrants and other groups, they may get confused about it, but the white supremacists never are. Every time the white right goes in on these immigrants, especially the black immigrants, liars like Thomas Sowell suddenly stop pushing that line about black immigrants are more successful than native-born blacks, and that proves that there's no racism. They don't say anything at all. We understand why these other groups refuse to join forces with us. They all thought they would climb the ladder over us. And for a while it looked like they were right. But they went beyond just co-signing white supremacy's lies about us. They also became active and often violent participants in our oppression. Take a look at America's police departments, these sheriff's departments, especially in places like Florida. Take a look at America's prisons, these correctional officers. Across the board in law enforcement, you find a disproportionate number of these immigrants who are behind these badges. And they carry out the same kind of dirt as their white supremacist counterparts. This is part of the evil that nobody talks about, but should. Time to set the record straight. There's been a hell of a lot of people who went all in for anti-black racism, even though they themselves would otherwise have been categorized as black. And I don't want to hear any tough talk from Somalian politicians or their other mouthpieces. These are not people who fight. These are people who fled. They refused to stand up to the corruption in their own culture back in Somalia. They wouldn't even stand up for fellow Somalians here, like Mohammed Noor. So they're not about to stand up to white supremacy or Donald Trump now. Who are they trying to fool? The white supremacists aren't fooled. You can strut around like a peacock one minute and have your back broken the next. Now let's also clear up some things as it pertains to DNC shills who are trying to sneakily maneuver you away from what this is really about. There's been a number of black content creators who have been talking about Trump's Somalian remarks, but beware, family, because the same DNC shills and political prostitutes who lectured us for years and whined that we have to vote for Biden and then Kamala, or there would be an American Gestapo to round us up, Project 2025 will be Nazi America, these same Democratic shills are gloating today. How can they gloat when they should be terrified? It's because they already knew from the jump that they were lying the whole time. And I noticed that a few of these people who are talking about this, they're openly campaigning for the Democrats. That's what they're using this for. I'm not going to say any names because YouTube's algorithm makes it easy for you to stumble across these clowns. But they're making it very clear that when they talk about the Somalians, all they care about is you should have voted for Kamala Harris. You guys should have voted for Kamala. That's all that they say. Well, the only reason this is happening is because Kamala Harris isn't president. See, you effed around and found out because Kamala Harris isn't president. That's the entire message from these shills. They say absolutely nothing about the decades of disrespect and outright attacks that the Somalians and others have leveled at the FBA community. They don't even care about that. They don't say a word about any of that because for them, this is just another opportunity to say vote blue no matter who. You got a whole lot of folks out here who are saying that mess, and you need to be on the lookout for them. The entire reason that the Somalians are now effing around and finding out is precisely because they thought they were on team white supremacy. That's the real problem. It ain't who they voted for, it's who they refuse to stand with. You see interviews with these black immigrants going all the way back to the 60s, and they were boldly saying they weren't black. They saw the same playbook that other immigrant groups, from the Irish to the Germans, to the Italians, to the Jews, to the Asians, to the Hispanics and others. They saw the same playbook that white supremacy rinsed and repeated for all of those other groups. And then they said, hey, we can play that game too. We'll go ahead and be a buffer group for white supremacy. In fact, we'll be the ultimate buffer group because we can give you something that the Asians and the Hispanics and the Italians and the Jews and the Irish can't give you. And that is folks who look black, but who will deny being black all day long and who will boldly say there is no racism in America. Why, look at us. We'll go ahead and say that these black Americans are just as lazy as white power's always said. We'll go ahead and do that because we know we're going to get some crumbs from white supremacy's table. It didn't matter if there was a Republican in office or a Democrat in office, they would keep up the same anti-FBA attacks. That's the real issue. So if you see anyone out here who's pretending to talk about this issue, but the only thing they feel that's worth saying is, you should have voted for the Democrats. This is what you get for not voting for Kamala. That's just a political whore selling themselves for a DNC check. Yes, the shills have gone hungry for a while, and to them this isn't about people who have attacked us finally facing consequences. Instead, to them it's just a cheap opportunity to sell the same old soap. Anyone who references Trump's Somalian comments but doesn't make it entirely about how they've attacked and disrespected us, but instead they try to make it into some half-brained get-out-the-vote speech, that's a shill, full stop. When you see some black person saying these immigrants have FAFO'd, but they spend all their time whining that, yeah, should have voted for Kamala, and even having the nerve to boost the Obamas while they're at it, this is not someone who's on our side. That's a DNC plant trying to piggyback on our momentum, because they're the exact same people who were telling us we needed to vote for Kamala Harris and get nothing for it. A bootlick has no power. They didn't do anything to make this come about. They were fighting against it every step of the way. If anything, they should be looking and saying, you know what? When you disrespect the foundational black American community, this is what you get. Because that is what happened. Now sure, we can all enjoy the delicious irony of pointing out how there were Somalis for Trump just last year, and these are the main ones hollering today, and it does go to show that these immigrant activists have the survival instincts of a fruit fly, and yes, it's predictable that the same people who didn't seem to notice or care that Trump targeted them his first term turn right around and say, let's put him back in the White House again. When you spent the better part of a century sucking up to white power, you're not going to turn your back on them because you have really nowhere else to turn. Their entire identity is that they're not black. They're immigrants. They're Muslims, anything but black. So when they have to face racism, they got to go out of their way not to talk about it because to do so would mean that they were black. Well, that's not going to be the narrative this time around. They're going to have to stand on their square and be consistent to the bitter end. The problem is anti-immigrant xenophobia. Certainly not racial. It has to be immigrant xenophobia because, as they themselves said, they escaped being black. They're not black. They've escaped blackness the same way they escaped their home country. Though I have to wonder, what did the orange man promise them to get their support last year? One does have to ask. But the Somalians were no less foolish than the black mayors who were out there supporting Mike Bloomberg when he ran for president. He was the primary backer of stop and frisk, and when he was confronted on it, he said that they needed to harass and arrest more black New Yorkers. But none of that stopped those sellout mayors from standing with him. He only pretended to change his tune around the time that he thought that he could run for president. Black Democrat mayors totally overlooked all of that, and they said, let's go ahead and make the stop and frisk guy president. How is that any less foolish than Somalians who didn't learn anything from how they were treated during Trump's first term? But you won't see any of these black DNC shill content creators bringing that up, will you? Because a lot of them who are speaking on this, all they want to say is, this is why you should have voted for Kamala Harris. No, this is why they should never have disrespected us. They thought they had found a comfortable place under white supremacy. So when someone talks about this and the first thing or even the only thing they say is, they were saying Somalis for Trump. Yeah, they're just getting their comeuppance because they supported Trump. Never mind how they were disrespectful towards us. Take a listen to what these shills say. See if they mention that fact in passing or if all they're saying is, vote for the Democrats. These intersectional shills, many of whom identify as anything other than black, they identify themselves by their sexuality or their religion or national origin. So these shills are just as fork-tongued as the Somalian shills are. You have black feminists who are whining because they wanted Kamala to be president. And you got people who are part of the LGBT who are gloating right now for the exact same reason. These shills are the ones who, if they had their way, this reckoning wouldn't be happening at all. They had absolutely nothing to do with this moment. But the memo went out from DNC headquarters that they had better turn this into a vote for us next year in the midterms or else moment. So be on the alert, family. Now, while it's undeniably true that the majority of Somalian immigrants were the ones who caused all this to happen and that this has been decades in the making, there is something that I ought to say to the handful of Somalian immigrants who have been on code and haven't been with the BS. What you should be doing is remembering this moment. More importantly, you remember who brought this upon you. Yeah, there's a hell of a wake-up call going on, but it didn't have to happen. The people who are upset right now because they're not getting any support, they had every chance there is to get their minds right. They did everything that they could to separate themselves from us. They were divisive, and now they are divided and being conquered. That's how white supremacy operates, how it's always operated. There need to be people from within these communities, inside these immigrant enclaves, who tell them that they're lying and who point this out. Somebody has to take a stand. Because while the chances are pretty good that the orange man isn't going to be able to do any sort of mass roundups by the hundreds of thousands, It is true that his inflammatory remarks are going to embolden a hell of a lot of people, especially in Europe, who have been pushing an anti-African immigrant line. And by the way, you got a bunch of those people from the Horn of Africa, Somalians, Eritreans, and even a few Ethiopians who deny being Africans. Far as they're concerned, they're basically a nationality unto themselves. And that's what makes them easy prey for the enemy. Now, for the people who were not on code who have been listening this far, here's my advice to you. Tell these white supremacists how hard-working you are. We've already seen that from a number of people. They've been repeating that line because that's all they know to say. Well, go ahead and keep it up. Just keep saying, hey, we're hardworking. Trump is wrong. We're so hardworking. Go ahead and tell them that Trump just doesn't know you, that if he met you, he would think differently about you. Never mind the fact that just last year, that's exactly what he did. He was running around meeting with Somalians in Minnesota. That's the reason why he was able to get their support. He already met them. And now look at what he's saying. There are some people who simply don't want to admit that they outsmarted themselves, that they were played for fools. What they thought to themselves was that there was some sort of conspiracy of silence between themselves and white supremacy, an unspoken understanding that they would go ahead and lie and sell the soap for white power and then get a few crumbs from its table afterwards. Well, go ahead and tell white power how hard you worked to carry water for it. And see how persuasive that argument is. Better yet, just tell them that you're not like those lazy black Americans. Remind them that you're not black. Oh wait, the orange man made sure not to say that this was about being black. He said this was about nationality and foreign cultures and failed societies. Yeah, he was saying black immigrant without using the word black, but that's a distinction without a difference now, isn't it? The Somalians are coming under fire from the exact same dominant society that they spent decades trying to impress. They've been hostile towards us, and worst of all, they did it intentionally to profit off of us being disenfranchised and harmed. The plan was to help white power marginalize us and for them to be put in our place. This is what happened in Africa and the Caribbean. This is why everything from slavery to colonialism ran rampant in these places. No loyalty from the locals. Everyone ready to turn on each other in a heartbeat. That's the culture that nobody dares to address. Now, am I going to call what the orange man's doing justice? Well, I can't say one way or the other. What I can say is that this is what the Somalians wanted. They wanted to be separated from us. They made it a point to make common cause with our enemies and to help prop up and justify the anti-black apparatuses that oppress us. They thought they had gotten over on our dead bodies and depriving us of what we should have had, and then bragging and boasting that this was their success. They justified white supremacy, and human garbage like Thomas Sowell and others pushed the lie that their quote-unquote success as immigrants, and black immigrants at that, well, this proved that anti-black racism simply didn't exist. After all, how do you explain how these other successful immigrants go from rags to riches in one generation? Well, Donald Trump is telling the world they did it through massive fraud. That's the lie that they were telling for damn near a century now. Somalians and others reveled in it because they thought, for a while anyway, that their little finesse had worked. They were only too happy to trash us and attack us because they were on team white supremacy. And now their friends are showing them what they've always thought of them. Now those same Somalians are asking us to stand with them. This is the same Somalian community who wouldn't even stand with Mohammed Noor when he was charged with killing a white woman. Where were the Somalian activists at then? Even Ilhan Omar was quiet during that episode. They know the rules of racism, and like these other non-white immigrants, they all know that white power made it clear their ticket to ride was proving they were down with anti-black racism, that they would reinforce the racial hierarchy. And so they did. And for a while, it looked like it was working. Being tools for white supremacy always seems to work, right up until the moment it doesn't. Somalians pushed the whole "we work hard" narrative, and white power pretended to go along with it, but white supremacy isn't based on hard work. In fact, white privilege is all about getting things for not working. White supremacy is all about the only qualification for success, being classified as white. That's it. That's the totality of it. So when you got these Somalians and others who are in front of the cameras in tears saying, "We work so hard, we've got jobs," that's part of the reason why these white supremacists laugh in their faces and don't care. They're looking and going, hell, the system we created, success ain't about hard work. We don't respect hard work. We only respect the racial hierarchy, and you ain't in it. As I've always said, once white supremacy is done with its tools, it breaks its tools. and no one's coming to the rescue. Not even their own government. The same disloyalty and culture of lies and backstabbing and fleeing instead of fighting and telling lies constantly that typified these places, that kind of lack of character starts at the top with these corrupt leaders, so they're not going to do anything. The reason the Somalians here talk trash about us is because that's how they act toward each other at home. That's why there's so much sectarianism there. Why do you think that Somalia is constantly in a state of civil war? They have all these ethnic groups in such a small country. All of these clans and religious sects within sects. And that's what matters most to them. Someone was born over there around the way, and they're going to fight these guys to the death and call them all kinds of names. And the same goes for other ethnic groups in their own country. They cannot understand the kind of unity that we have here. They simply can't comprehend it. This is why they're so eager to attack us, because that is the culture over there. And that's why they had to flee. And soon as we made it possible for them to find safe harbor here, did they even say thank you? No, not even once. So they need to call on other immigrants to help them out. The other immigrants who Trump and his supporters have under fire. Us FBAs, we're just too lazy to help anyone, remember? We're too shiftless, remember? We're too busy committing crimes and not taking care of our families, remember? So that's what we're doing. We're busy looking for jobs right now, and we're trying to be productive, and we're busy taking care of our families. These anti-black racists, these tethers, they've said for a century that they don't need us, that they're not one of us, and whenever there's racial problems in this country, these black immigrants are never anywhere to be seen. Well, we got the message, so we're bowing out, permanently. You have a lot of problems in your culture that you need to deal with. It's the reason you fled in the first place, and don't go saying that what's happening is racial. The Hispanics also wanted to pick and choose when they were white or people of color, and they're also seeing these white supremacists were never confused on that one either. And even with all of the mass deportations and all of the illegal arrests, you still have the Hispanics' attitude toward black people hasn't changed. And the same goes for Asians as well. Dinesh D'Souza cannot understand why his white right-wing pals are so anti-Indian all of a sudden. Apparently the little half-wit was in a coma for the last 500 years. Just goes to show that for these immigrant groups, the delusion of being white, or at the very least white adjacent, is so powerful, so overwhelming, that even with irrefutable evidence, even being beaten, arrested, and insulted to their faces, even with white society calling them garbage in front of the world, they're still wanting to be on the team. Somalians are looking around and wondering where the mass demonstrations are. Well, you're going to need masses to do that, and they don't have the numbers. And they spat in the faces of the people who do. The same tethers who white power installed in the government and played down their backgrounds so FBAs would think that they were from our lineage, or at the very least, we would continue to make common cause with them. Those clowns are still in office. The Joe Negussis and the Ilhan Omars and the other suck-ups and shills, they're still in office. So go to them. Tell them to stick up for you. But as I've already pointed out for you, they can't even post anything on their website. And they barely posted anything on Twitter. So that being the case, these shills, these suck-ups, the Immigrant Black Caucus, they already recognize that without us, they don't have any muscle behind any of their mouth. They don't have the ability to put any people in the streets. You need support from the grassroots for that, and they don't have it. So that's the reason why they're sitting here trying to dodge this issue. And then you got the clowns like Karine Stank-Pierre and others who white power put in the media. I recommend that the Somalians tell them to stick up for them. After all, these people have clout and power, right? Tell the Somalian Prime Minister to speak up for you. Oh, that's right, he said it's best not to respond. Well then, I don't know what to tell you, other than we're sitting this one out, and everyone after it. There needs to be a real cost that goes along with disrespecting our lineage. And when that disrespect has gone on for generations, and the people who do it smile while they're doing it, and they make sure to repeat every anti-black talking point possible, and they actually act as the creditors for white supremacy. They're trying to justify and say, oh, look at us, we're the proof that what those oppressed people of theirs say isn't true. When people do that, when they perpetrate that disrespect gleefully and say that they're better than us, and they boast that they will replace us in whatever positions we fought to gain, then the cost needs to be substantial. Tethering for fun and profit should never be lucrative. It should be the road to ruin. And in this case, that road is going to be long and hard. So all I can say is, start walking. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Joyce Blizzard, Suleiman Alaji, Morris Bodden, Terrence Broughton, and James Hampton. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.